Hey, welcome back, everyone, to the Progressive Brothers podcast. This is episode 86. I'm here with my co-host, Renaissance Man.
Hey, welcome back, everyone. Please like the video. Peace to everyone in the chat. Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell.
Also, make sure you follow us on Twitter at brothers_podcasts. So, we've seen many upsets in this November 2nd with all of the electoral happenings around the country, where you have two gubernatorial races and many mayoral races and many ballot initiatives. Let's start with Virginia. What's your thoughts on the gubernatorial race between
Glenn Junkin
and Terry McAuliffe?
Yeah, that was a interesting race. If you've paid attention to the news, this has been the most dominant one in the news. A lot of people are trying to dig in and try to basically extrapolate this and that from the race. From the people I've talked to leading up into the actual election, there is some disappointment that Terry McAuliffe lost. But I mean, also, I think people are kind of pointing to, this was his second term running for governor. My understanding from talking to people in Virginia is they actually have a law where you can't run for back-to-back terms. So Junkin, he'll basically have 4 years, and then, essentially he's a sitting duck, and then he has to sit out, and then if he wants to run again, he can run again. So I think a lot of things played into it. I think first, Junkin was an outsider. Background. I believe went to Rice University and then went to Harvard Business School. Was an executive for the Carlyle Group. Retired a rich businessman off of working at the Carlyle Group, and basically ran for office. My understanding, he's basically been running this campaign for 2 years. People said they saw Junkin signs all over Virginia, which they just attribute that to. That's sort of one of those eye tests that. When you have yard signs everywhere, it's usually a good sign. I know I definitely saw that with Doug Jones won in Alabama. McAuliffe, like I said, he had been governor before, definitely had some missteps, had some real gaffes, but was actually winning. I think the gaffe that really got him was when he said that parents should not have a say in their kids' education. I think they really trounced on that. Junkin, he was a Trump candidate in the sense that Trump endorsed him, but he very much took that endorsement quietly and tried to distance himself from it. So, I really describe him as more of like a Mitt Romney type of Republican, that whole archetype. But I mean, I don't think that I already heard people. I had someone call me this morning and say, progressives caused the McAuliffe to lose. And I said, no, I think really not having anything to run on is what's really hurt Dems in that race. Coupled with people didn't come out to vote. They were saying, like, when you look at places like Virginia Tech and those places where a lot of the young people, millennials, Gen Zers are, that you had turnout that was way down. And I believe someone told me that Junkin had about 200,000 more Republicans show up than showed up in 19. So Republicans really came out, and I think the whole CRT debate really worked and really fear-mongered his people to the polls. So
no, and that's kind of what McAuliffe was running up against. He was running up against a narrative and not exactly a figure, because Junkin is not a national figure. I mean, he, like you said, he's like a Mitt Romney Republican, more of a business type, but you can replace him with anybody else, and as long as the narrative is the same of CRT, then it doesn't matter. And so I think what's happening now, because they threw, the Dems threw everything they could at this. They threw Obama, they threw Michelle, they threw Biden, they threw Jill Biden out there.
Kamala, I think.
Yeah, they threw Kamala out there. They threw what's his face from the Neptunes, Pharrell. They threw Pharrell out there. So they threw everything they could at this guy, but at the end of the day, it wasn't about Junkin. It was about the narrative. And the problem with the Dems is their ability to communicate on the ground and get things done. And they were ineffective in their messaging and ineffective in their ground game. And that's where they lost. The ability to sidestep CRT and dismantle that whole entire rhetoric. They just were not able to do it. And that comes down to messaging, infrastructure, and groundwork. It was just absent. Obama was there, but I think Obama may have ignited the base for the conservatives more than coming out for the Dems. And so, yeah, it's going to be pretty strange, but that's the outcome, and that is a litmus test for what's going to happen in 2022.
Well, I think I've heard people say that, and I thought it can go either way, in my opinion, still. Dems can either kind of continue down the path they're going, or they can kind of take it as a wake-up call. In the ideal world, they kind of take it as a wake-up call in the sense of, be very careful about the candidate you put up, because people I talked to from Virginia, they said, hey, he got the primary nod in the Democratic primary over two other black women. One that was very popular, just fell about 2% short. Same sort of thing, establishment candidate, someone who's been around, sort of a retread of a politician, and that's what Dems win with. And, it came back to bite them because, they didn't have Trump. And when you don't have Trump, it kind of becomes, okay, these suburban people feel a little bit more comfortable with, even if you have some Trump-style rhetoric, which they said Junkin had, he's someone they can talk. He's a lot more palatable than Trump. He has, he's had at least a respectable business career. He doesn't have just all that baggage. So when Dems run into that, it becomes once again a messaging thing, especially when you don't have someone who's particularly charismatic as well too. But I mean, like I said, it can definitely act as an opportunity for, I think, Dems to really focus on, hey, we need to have a message if we're going to run. But then also I thought too, this is kind of standard procedure in the sense of, if you look at the governor's race in Virginia, it tends to flop with the president. Like there's a trend, like, if Trump won, then you get someone like Ralph Northam winning. And then, Biden wins the presidency and you get a Republican winning. So it's followed that pattern for several cycles as well. So part of this could just be part of the cycle as well.
Yeah. Yeah, but I guess what concerns me is if the Dems don't get something big passed by November or by the end of November, December, it's the writing on the wall for what's going to happen in 2022. The dissatisfaction is going to lead more of these sort of victories in 2022, and that could spell doom for 2024. Now, Junkin actually, distancing himself from Trump. It may seem like, the endorsement, he took it, and put it in his pocket. But what I'm saying here is that he's never going to go up against Trump, and I don't see him, really. I mean, where other place does he have to go after 4 years, right? I mean, where do you go after that? I mean, okay, he runs for the Senate, but if Trump is in office at that, or is running at that point, he may run into some serious issues too. And you may have a bit of a civil war within the party, because if they're trying to distance themselves from Trump, and Trump is the figurehead of the party, that's a bit of a conflict.
Yeah. I think, and I was talking to someone, some of his policies, like on things like CRT, this guy was a teacher. He was basically saying that, if he attempts to pass the bill, like banning CRT or not teaching about it, he's like, basically kids won't be able to pass a standard ACC test or any sort of like standardized test for school testing requirements, because, when you start talking about trying to ban CRT, like what they did in Texas, like you run into, okay, you can't teach about things like hierarchies and this and that. And he's like, okay, I basically can't teach about civilization because, hierarchy has been present in all civilization. So it's one of those things that I think I see this a lot with Republicans, and I think Dems are sort of going through these growing pains too. Of it's real easy to campaign, but it's hard to govern, and I think that's why you're seeing, like, when you saw the Republicans in power with Trump, you saw a lot more fractures in their party, and then right now they look a lot more unified, but they're not governing, and Dems look a lot more fractured right now, but they're having the burden to govern, and everyone's now in power and trying to take something back to their respective constituencies. So I think at the end of the day, with the Junkin campaign, these people are going to have to govern, and if they can't govern, in 4 years you're going to see it swing back to Dems.
Moving on to New Jersey gubernatorial race. So Philip Murphy versus Jack Terrell, must be an Italian name. He won by Philip Murphy won by the skin of his teeth, and so that is like a wake up call for the Dems that they must do something now, right? Because whatever they were running on before isn't working, and New Jersey is a very liberal, for lack of a better description, it's a liberal state. So if Dems are having a hard time winning in their own on home turf, that could really spell disaster to 2022 for any congressional seats that they may have to fight for.
Yeah, this one I heard, and the perspective, it's sort of one of those that's it's weird in the sense of, like, this is the first time, I believe, since 1976 that a Dem has run back-to-back terms in New Jersey. So you do have that dynamic. The big concern is that this guy was plus 17 when he ran previously, and now he won by, looks like it's going to be about 2%. So that margin eroded greatly. I'm not sure what turnout looked like.
1%.
But it definitely, I'm sure that played into it as well. But from talking to people, Jersey's kind of like a lot of places where, the southern portion is a lot more red versus the northern portion close to, NYC, things like that. That's a lot more blue stronghold. Obviously with the major cities as well too. But I think once again, it's one of those things. It's a win for Dems, but it's not something you should feel warm about. I think it's one that the party's just got to really get focused on. Once again, they can't run on Trump. That's what we were talking about with what I was talking about with other people earlier today, that, when you take Trump out of the equations, Democrats are back to the same old thing of, hey, what do we run on? We can't just run on, we're not these people. We got to have policies and things to talk about. And we can't take the bait of CRT all the time, because a lot of times what happens is, Dems will get asked by CRT, and then they'll want to have this, intellectual type of discussion of what CRT is and how it's not being taught and this and that. And people sometimes get baited into, okay, people aren't looking necessarily for a rational answer. You have to more be of, hey, it's not being taught, it's a sideshow. I'm not going to talk about it anymore. Let's talk about things like the healthcare reform, because Republicans don't have an answer. Because the more times Dems spend on defense, talk about things like CRT, the less issues that, Republicans really have to deal and talk about. And that to me is what the whole goal of CRT was. So same thing there for New Jersey. It's nice to see that he's going to be reelected, but it's just got to be something that Dems take feedback for and definitely go and try to work on. And I think on the two bills, recently they've said that now they're willing to split them up, which originally they weren't willing to do. But after now that they haven't been passed, I really don't see anything probably coming till January, just because, in my opinion, you're not going to get too much by passing it around the holidays. In my opinion, you're better off, waiting to the beginning of the year and then having something to run on in the fall.
So let's swing to New York City, because New York City is really important in terms of politics itself. Eric Adams has been declared as the mayor of New York City as of this morning, and so he ran against Curtis Wheeler, which is the founder of how am I forgetting this now? The Guardian Angels. Sorry, I had a brain fart there for a second. Yeah, so Curtis Wheeler was the founder of the Guardian Angels, and he ran as a Republican. I watched those debates. He's a Trump acolyte without actually being affiliated with the MAGA movement. Short of a red hat, his red hat is a beret, and Trump's is a fitted. So Eric Adams swept himself all the way into the victory, against Curtis Wheeler. And it's important that people understand that Eric Adams actually went to the White House and met with Biden during the race. What they talked about, I don't know. I guess police reform and things of that nature. But they pretty much know or knew that he was going to be the guy going into the final stretch. And so, am I satisfied with the victory? Yeah. Am I satisfied more that he's a black man? Absolutely. Did New York City, New York City wanted someone other than de Blasio. And I think de Blasio left a sour taste in a lot of people's mouths, during the pandemic. And just how it was handled, it just didn't seem like it was professionally done, and people were looking for something other than de Blasio, and Eric Adams is that something other than de Blasio, and both considered to be liberals, but they saw Eric Adams as something radically different than de Blasio, and the same old, and so I think this is going to be an interesting next 4 years for New York City and New York politics as a whole, because they still have a gubernatorial race to run next year as well. So what do you think, Renaissance Man?
Yeah, Adams winning, I think, kind of a foregone conclusion after he won the primary earlier this year, that he'd win the general. I did believe, I don't know if you heard about this, wasn't there someone like more of like a socialistic type of candidate ran as like third party maybe?
Yes.
Don't know how they turned it out doing. I can't remember the name right now, but people were like saying, "Hey, pay attention," more so for like name recognition and whether they can, make some noise in the future. Third party. With Adams though, but de Blasio, my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, he at least ran as a lot more progressive. Versus, I got the vibe from Adams is that he's not quite as progressive. He did talk about some issues like improving communities, but I think people sort of look at him as this sort of, wouldn't say moderate, but like, if de Blasio is center far left, he's more center left in that sense. I think the former police background, I think he had some interesting comments on stop and frisk. I didn't think he outright said, "Hey, go back to it," but I think he sort of alluded to like, a pared down version, if that makes sense. I don't know if any of that, recall any of that.
Yeah, he's pretty ambiguous in his stop and frisk politic in policy, and so people are kind of okay with that. It's NYC, so the reaction is going to be a little bit different, because when stop and frisk was happening, 80% of the stops were African American, and so, or African American and Latino, and so the people who supported the most don't look like Eric Adams at all. They were kind of okay with that, and so he's strategically answering the question by not answering the question with an answer, and so I think that. You're right to say that he is center-left. He's definitely a centrist in a lot of these views, or the majority of his views. The woman that you're talking about who ran for mayor as a socialist of NYC was Kathy Rojas.
Yes, yeah.
But they squeezed her out just like they squeezed out Bernie Sanders. So,
I figured the same thing. Some people were mentioning, a lot of these places like New York, they do the same thing. They try to push like the green parties and then get them off the ballot, things like that. So a lot of basically, hey, if you're not in the party, you're kind of out in the cold type of politics. But with Adams, I think that what will be interesting is as New York City sort of reopens, really seeing if when the city opens back up, with the city opening back up, maintaining business, Wall Street, some of those firms, not a bunch, but some have moved some operations down to Florida, warmer weather. People got used to being out of the office. So, I think he's sort of in a situation, maybe a little bit that David Duke's in. I'm sorry, not David Duke. Wow. Where'd that come from? David Dinkins. David Dinkins. Sorry about that. That David Dinkins was in when he started running, in the sense of, you got crime a little bit on the uptick just because people have been locked down, some concerns around business, things like that. Dinkins came in, was able to lower crime, redevelop Times Square. I believe the big tennis match, slipping my name now, the U.S. Open maybe, that's held up in New York as well. He helped bring that there as well. So I think Adams is kind of, ironically, historically, kind of in that same spot again of, you got a few challenges that if you can deal with can really, bring the city back even better than it was before if you really, embrace it. So I think it'll be interesting to see how his mayorship goes, and as well as how he has to sort of walk that line of being former police officer, so not being too pro police, very much still hoping behind the people, but at the same time not throwing the police out to dry, kind of like with de Blasio's terms. He had several of those instances where I'll never forget, there was I think it was maybe like a press conference or something was happening. A bunch of police basically turned their back to him because, they felt like he kind of left him out there, left him out to dry. So I think maintaining those relations would be big. And, who knows? It could be a springboard to, something else. I mean, you do well as New York City mayor, one of the largest, if not the largest city in America, statewide offices is definitely going to be an option, like governorship or, even a senatorship, something like that. So he could definitely build a career if he does well.
And staying in New York and swinging over to Buffalo, India Walton basically conceded a couple hours ago that she would not be, and it's unlikely that she would be advancing into the mayoral seat for Buffalo. Byron Brown would be the incoming candidate, write-in as an independent. So it's unfortunate that India Walton had rode a very strong wave. There was a lot of socialist support. The squad supported her. Bernie supported her. Some of the Washington establishment supported her. And for whatever reason, this didn't work out. But this didn't work out for her in the same way it didn't work out for Kathy Rojas in NYC, and also like it did not work out for Bernie. And so looking at all of this, I think people should take into consideration that the establishment will go through great lengths to keep anti-establishment people from coming in. We saw this with Nina Turner not too long ago, about a month or so ago, or a couple months ago, in Cleveland. So easy come, easy goes with with socialist candidates. I thought personally that she would be in on the money on this. I thought it was the right time, and she was the right person to come as an outsider. Now, where she goes after this, I can't really figure out where she goes after this. There's got to be some restructuring. The squad has got to be in contact with her. DSA has got to be in contact with her, in terms of what the next steps are going to be, because you're talking 4 years from now. That's a long time for somebody like her.
Yeah, I think I think it's kind of a good thing in the sense of, it really shows how I mean, people saw it with Bernie, but when you see things like this, it really just shows how anti-Democratic Party really is to the far left and really exposes that rift. I think, like I said, I think Dems are going to have to, they're going to have to run on something. And I think the more and more, if Trump begins to fade, I think the more and more they're going to be grasping at something to run on. And I think that's when progressives are really going to have the chance to strike, because, I have these discussions with people all the time that, at the end of the day, progressive policies are very popular when you ask people about them. The problem is getting the messaging out. Dems don't do well at that, and really saying, hey, this is what we went and did. And then B, actually like running on and getting pressure put on to actually get these things passed. That seems to be a problem as well too, that either people get in power, they don't have the votes, or you kind of see what you have now is sort of divide amongst the party, and you really can't get done what you need to get done. But I think the fact that she won, I think that's definitely got to scare the establishment a little bit. And, maybe, I know progressives don't want to hear this, but, maybe that leads to some leverage with what, at least progressives have been fighting for in this administration. It's yet to be seen if they get it in the Biden administration. They're still negotiating, but, that gives them leverage, her winning regardless. Even if she wasn't able to, be successful, it literally took, the Democratic incumbent essentially running as an independent to win in the general.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of Republican support, conservative support came in for Byron Brown. And then you had, NYC, GOP woman, Nick, well, I shouldn't say woman, but Chairman Nick Langworthy, basically saying we rejected socialism in Buffalo. And I'm saying you needed socialism in Buffalo. Look at the economics out there. It's really strange that they seem to push back against socialism, but then don't have an actual answer to what people want. It's really strange, because they did that to Bernie. Like, oh, well, Medicare for all. Well, we don't really support that. So what do you support? That sort of response is what I'm seeing is empty from the Democratic Party. This is kind of probably leads to why they lost in Virginia. They really have a huge issue with the messaging, the infrastructure, and the ground game. They just don't know how to communicate with their base, but they want the base to come out for them, but not actually give anything to the base in exchange. And it's like, I don't know. 65% of millennials and zennials actually identify as socialists in this country. And so, in recent polling. And so, if you're the Democratic Party, it would behoove you to actually pay attention to a growing demographic in your part, in your as your constituents over the next 4 years, because it's only going to get, it's only going to increase over the next 4 years.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. We were mentioning Gen Z and millennials. I believe millennials alone are the largest voting bloc in the country at this point. Now, because, a millennial technically can be someone who's damn near 40. Last time I checked, they're like 37. So that was a couple years back. So maybe like 38, 39.
The oldest millennial will be 39.
Okay, 39. So, that's, people talk about millennials in the kind of the sense of, like they talked about them 10 years ago, like they were still in college. But that's really Gen Z that you're talking about at that point. So, those two demographics, really are shaped by a lot of negative forces, both with millennials more, especially if you were a millennial and you graduated college in like 2008, you came right out in the recession, had to deal with that, student loans, just started to catch back up. Probably around 2012, 2013, when the economy started to improve really dramatically and, really heat up. And then here you are going into 2020, 7 years later, and you got COVID, which, could have delivered another blow to a lot of people. And truth be told, a lot of people didn't really get off their feet initially from 2008. So it's been a lot of rocky roads for millennials. And like we said, some of the older ones are now reaching, middle aged, and that's when it may start to hit some of these people that, hey, if we don't have some massive changes, they're really seeing their life prospects are just going to be not what they grew up and their expectations lived up to. So, I think what's got to happen is that student demographics really have to show, that under 40 demographic, maybe even under 35, has really got to step up and really be counted on in politics if we really want to see some real change.
So let's swing down to let's swing to Minnesota. So Minneapolis had on their ballot to dismantle their current police department and replace it with a public safety agency. That did not pass on the ballot. 56% voted no, 43% voted yay on it. So I don't know where Minneapolis goes from here, because if the idea here is police reform, right? The George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, it's not getting a lot of traction, and reforming the police not getting a lot of traction, despite all of the incidents that are still happening. Ma Arbery and some of these other cases that have propped up in the last 6 months or so, even the last 6 weeks. It doesn't seem to be enough to move the needle with voters. So if they're not going to reform the police, and they weren't even talking about like this big dramatic defunding the police. They were actually just talking about creating a new sort of police department police agency from the ground up as a public safety agency, and not one of the tradition that caused all of these calamities to begin with. And people still are not moved by this. Like, so why did all these people come out in the first place in Minnesota to, support George Floyd if they weren't going to actually reform their police? It didn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
I think it's cool. To be honest with you, I think it's kind of a blow. I think it's kind of the blow for a substantial change, just because, George Floyd was basically a little bit over a year ago. So you pretty much had a year versus if you could have done something in 3 or 4 months while, there's a lot of energy, people were still in the street, a lot of protests going on. I think you could have seen change, but, over a year later to have to wait to try to reform things, it's just like, if you can't get it now, a year from now, it'll be 2 years, 2 years from now, when you're in your next, ballot initiative, unless, you have a special election, you can get it on then. So it's kind of like the push for substantial change at the local level, I think is going to, kind of tail off. And, federally, George Floyd Policing Act seems to be dead in the Senate right now, just because negotiations went nowhere. I think it just speaks to so much of, hey, you got to strike while the iron's hot, and if the mechanisms aren't there, I don't know if this is possible in Minnesota, but I would have been trying to push for a referendum immediately. Hey, let's push. Let's not wait for the next election. Let's have an election, as soon as possible, and vote on this, and make a decision now and proceed forward. But like I said, while there's still a lot of energy, because when George Floyd happened, I'll never forget the mayor, Jacob. I can't remember his last name, but I'll never forget him coming down to all those activists who were sitting out there at George Floyd Square, and him basically saying, okay, I won't defund the police, but I'll do this. And they were booing him and telling him, like, hey, you don't do, actually defund the police, we're going to vote you out of office. And he just, I've never seen a politician just be so I don't even know what the word is, just sort of shut down by his own constituency, and just kind of you could just tell it was I don't know what to do. It's just too much. People are too engaged between, not having the normal world and being cooped up all inside, and thousand moment where just everyone kind of came out and, all sorts of energy was just feasted. It's just hard to recapture that.
Yeah, again, the left has a messaging issue. It's just, they don't get it. They have an infrastructure issue. They have a ground game issue. They just don't get what defunding the police, divesting from the police actually means. I don't know. I don't know what to do in those areas, but what I will say is this is going to hurt the left going into 2022. If they can't get anything effective done, no infrastructure bill, no police reform, no actual viable candidates to sit in office that reflect the people's will. They look dead in the water in 2022 at this point.
Yeah. Like I said, I think, like I said, they got to find messaging. They got to find the right balance. And they got to. And I talked about this to some people at times too. Even when Dems have something to run on, they talked about all the things that were passed, like with the CARES Act, and the COVID bill. All the benefits that are passed there, like little things you may not necessarily known about, like the $2 billion in funding that was there for HBCUs. They're like, Dems haven't really emphasized that yet. Trump gives, $350 million or $250, every year for 2 years, and everyone's, running around talking about Trump saved HBCUs. Yeah, and it wasn't even his bill, it's something he signed, but, that sort of messaging. But then I also mentioned to the person I was talking to, I was like, hey, part of what the DNC is always trying to struggle with is, they don't want to be seen as that party of black folks and brown folks, mainly black folks, because they don't want that perception out there of, redistribution of wealth. These people are taking, taxpayer dollars and, giving all these goodies to people who are black. So, sort of like when you had the relief for black and minority farmers, you had Lindsey Graham saying that's reparations. He knew what he was doing there. He was basically trying to say, kind of a dog whistle to throw out, say, hey, these people are taking your tax dollars and getting these benefits and living high off the hog off the government. So I think that also leads to the hesitancy of, but I think that line of being able to walk that tight line of hey, I'm going to turn out the black vote, but not, turn off the white vote at the same time, the white moderate vote that want to get, that line is getting tighter and tighter to walk. And I just don't think you're going to be able to do it for much longer.
Like, share, and subscribe. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at brothers_podcast.